The Allen Lund Company thanks all the hard-working drivers who are moving goods across the country. We can't do it without you.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
For some time, truckers have dealt with predatory towing. Several states have decided to tackle the problem, and the latest is Florida. I'll talk with Eric DeCampos of the National Insurance Crime Bureau. Tax time is quickly approaching, but you may not have all the paperwork you need to file. I'll discuss what can happen and what to do with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And finally, who is an employee and who is an independent contractor? The Department of Labor has a new rule, but some in Congress want to stop that effort. However, OOIDA is urging them to do something else first. I'll talk with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association sent a letter to every Republican member of the House, including Speaker Mike Johnson, imploring them to get anti-speed limiter legislation passed before moving on to another issue. OOIDA wants the House to pass H.R. 3039, otherwise known as the DRIVE Act, which would prevent FMCSA from imposing a speed limiter mandate. In the letter signed by OOIDA President Todd Spencer, the association stressed the importance of passing the bill before considering a resolution to overturn the Biden administration's new worker classification rule. That's where things stand right now, with the House considering a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval that would overturn the worker classification rule. The association wrote that while it is generally supportive of a 2021 Trump administration rule that should allow for owner-operators to continue working as independent contractors, it strenuously objects to a provision slipped into the final rule that effectively enables large carriers to mandate that the independent truckers they contract with use speed limiters. OOIDA wrote that, quote, "this level of micromanagement flies in the face of independence," end quote. The association also said it doesn't want large carriers to be able to force independent contractors to use technologies they deem unsafe. That's why the association is urging lawmakers to pass the DRIVE Act before attempting to overturn the U.S. Department of Labor's independent contractor rule. For more details on this story, we've got a full write-up on our website, landline.media. Diesel prices are up again. The national average Tuesday morning was at $4.07 a gallon, according to the ProMiles.com survey. That's up 14 cents compared to the same day last week. Prices up in all 10 regions on the ProMiles report, led by a 21-cent spike in the Rocky Mountain region. In fact, just 2 regions had gains of less than a dime compared to the week before. We'll have to wait till tomorrow for a look at the latest data from the Energy Information Administration. Their report was delayed a day due to the President's Day holiday on Monday. For the second week in a row, DAT has seen the lowest load volume in the past 8 years. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has more.
The brutal start to the year for the spot market continues in mid-February. Robert Rouse with DAT says they saw the number of loads decrease by 17.6% to around 647,000 loads on the DAT load board.
As we get a little closer to spring, we're going to be watching this year's produce production, which is typically a catalyst, a small catalyst for the year. So far, produce volumes have started 2024 at pretty low levels. January truckload volume is the lowest in the last 10 years, although late reporting in the California citrus may improve the numbers slightly. When we look at the number of trucks on the DAT load board, they also decreased last week down to 318,000 trucks. That's kind of abnormal from what we would see with a lower load volume, but that could be some of the attrition starting to really hit the market for trucks leaving, potentially having a little bit of an impact there.
Rouse says they saw load-to-truck ratios decrease for all 3 equipment types, and similar to the overall load volume, they are seeing the lowest load-to-truck ratios in the past 8 years. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. Be careful when going through your email inbox. There's yet another new scam going around, one that FMCSA is making truckers aware of. An email claiming to be from FMCSA is telling truckers they need to schedule a safety audit, but it is a phishing scam. Don't click on it. The link in the scam email has what appears to be a safer URL and mirrors FMCSA's MC150, but includes fields to enter a PIN, employer identification number, and social security number. Giving that info to a scammer would enable them to access your FMCSA account and do a lot of damage there or elsewhere. FMCSA said the email looks very convincing, but make no mistake, it's not from FMCSA, and it is a scam. The agency says any email regarding safety audits will come directly from an FMCSA dedicated mailbox or from the state you operate out of. That means you need to look for an email address that ends in .gov. If you're not sure about the authenticity of such a request, reach out to FMCSA directly. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has announced 3 new recalls that could relate to the truck you're driving. Let's run through them, starting with the biggest one that affects close to 900 trucks manufactured by Navistar. The steering gear may have been assembled incorrectly in certain 2024 International HX, LT, RH trucks, and certain 2024-25 International HV and MV trucks. The problem could lead to a loss of steering control. Then we've got our second recall of the week, this one being for certain Western Star 49X vehicles, model years 2022 through 24. About 50 trucks fall under this recall. It's over missing welds that can cause a suspension hanger to fail, also leading to a loss in steering. And finally, the smallest recall of the week, affecting just 11 FCCC MT45G, MT45, and Freightliner Cascadia trucks. The problem here is related to steering gear assemblies that may have been assembled incorrectly, with fewer recirculating balls than are required, which may result in a loss of steering control. As with any recall, contact your dealer with questions or concerns. If your truck is impacted, repairs will be made free of charge. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association has put out a call to action for more than 200 members who live in Palm Beach County, Florida. It's over a vote taking place this Thursday related to truck parking, amid calls to restrict the owners of commercial vehicles from parking in the acreage community. OOIDA said the move would affect a number of owner-operators who park their trucks on their own personal property. OOIDA is asking its Palm Beach County members to reach out to county commissioners and tell them why this is a bad idea. You've got just one more day to get your free tickets to the Mid-America Trucking Show. The free early bird registration period runs through February 21st. After that, the charge to register for MATS is $10. More than 58,000 people are expected to attend the show at the Kentucky Expo Center in Louisville next month, along with nearly 900 exhibitors. Plus, there's a host of other events like the PKY Truck Beauty Championship, Truck and Tractor Pulls, and more, like the Friday night concert featuring the Steel Woods. OOIDA will be there as well with a booth and will take part in the Pro Talks Education Series at MATS. The association will zero in on 2 topics, creating a business plan and the dangers of predatory factoring. For more information about MATS, which runs for 3 days starting March 21st, visit truckingshow.com. And finally, a San Antonio truck stop has reopened a little more than a year after being destroyed in a fire. The Pilot Flying J off exit 583 at Interstate 10 burned down after a fire that started at the attached Denny's restaurant, spread to the rest of the building. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to Dennis Lee Johnson of Clark, South Dakota. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 42 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 315 years without causing a single accident. Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, are at the TA Truck Stop in Laredo, Texas. That's located at the Beltway Parkway exit on Interstate 35. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Next, I'll talk with Eric DeCampos of the National Insurance Crime Bureau. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit Howe'sProducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now, 855-976-4291.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
Landline Now, welcome back. For some time, truckers have had to deal with predatory towing. Most towing companies are honest in how they conduct their business, but some stack up all kinds of charges that are questionable at best. And the problem, while especially expensive in trucking, is affecting all kinds of people. Several states have decided to tackle the problem, and the latest is Florida. One of the groups that's supporting that effort is the National Insurance Crime Bureau. I talked with Eric DeCampos of that organization to discuss how bad the problem is and what they're doing in Florida to try to solve it. Well, Eric, before we get into the main topic, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about the organization you work for, the National Insurance Crime Bureau? What is the group? What is its mission?
Sure. So NICB is a nonprofit organization. We've been around for over 100 years, and our mission is to work with state and local law enforcement, as well as our member insurance companies to detect, prevent, and deter insurance crimes. And for the purposes of this discussion, it's important to also include, when referring to insurance crimes, that also includes predatory towing.
Well, I wanted to ask you about predatory towing broadly before we talk more specifically. How big of a problem is this nationwide?
I would argue it's a significant problem, especially just within the last few years. So in my position, I work in government affairs for NICB. So my job is to monitor and analyze legislation from a number of states, as well as the rest of my team. And just within the last 3 years alone, we've actually monitored over 120 bills related to towing. And we've engaged on at least 12 of them. 12 of them had to deal with establishing guardrails around predatory towing and establishing important consumer protections. This issue is so significant that even the National Council of Insurance Legislators, so it's basically an organizational body that's made up of insurance legislators from all across the country, they get together and adopt model legislation on issues that is important to insurance companies. And they took it upon themselves to adopt a model in 2018 to address predatory towing. So that's how significant this is.
Let's talk more specifically here and get into predatory towing in Florida. How bad is the situation there?
So we see a lot of the same predatory behavior that we see in other states and local jurisdictions. And what I mean by that is from the common practices of inflated tow bills to holding vehicles hostage. Now, what probably exacerbates the issue in Florida is there's a lack of a uniform fee structure around towing services, towing and storage services. So what I mean by that is what the fees are for towing and storage in one county could differ in a different county. And so when we start seeing towing happening across county lines, that could create some confusion around how much money I'm going to be charged to have my vehicle towed, let's say 2 miles down the road. It just so happens that those 2 miles crossed over into a different county. Further complicating the issue is that some counties haven't set an established towing and storage rate. And so the onus is then on, well, what is the maximum level that could be charged for a tow or for daily storage? So predatory towers take advantage of this gray area. And we've seen predatory towers charge exorbitant fees in the thousands of dollars just for a routine tow just a few miles down the road.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about one aspect of predatory towing that we've been very interested in, and that's what we've come to call non-consensual towing, which is where instead of the driver calling a tow truck, there's a wreck or collision and law enforcement calls so that the drivers involved don't have a choice in which tow service to use. Are you seeing a lot of predatory practices connected to that in Florida and elsewhere?
So we do see it come up as an issue, yes, for the predatory or for the non-consensual aspect. So even though So when we're looking at the state of Florida, the Florida Highway Patrol has an established rate sheet for their wrecker services. So if you get into a car accident on the interstate, if Florida Highway Patrol comes out, they call in their wrecker from their preferred tow list or the rotation list. So they come in, they charge whatever is the established fee for that program. But what creates a little confusion, or when we start delving into that gray area, is, well, what happens if that non-consensual tow happens outside of an interstate? What happens if we're dealing with a county road? What happens if we're dealing with a major thoroughfare in a city jurisdiction? These jurisdictions, they may or may have not a tow rotation program. They may or may have not established those maximum fees. And that's where we start seeing some of the predatory behavior starting to emerge, where they're taking advantage of perhaps some areas where that hasn't necessarily been fleshed out in local ordinances or even state law.
A moment ago, you mentioned a number of predatory practices that some of the, shall we say, less than reputable towing services are using when it comes to predatory towing. I'm wondering if you've had a chance to look at Florida and determine what kinds of predatory practices, or which of those practices are maybe more prevalent there than elsewhere.
So I think the most egregious part is going to be the inflation of towing bills, because that goes back to the original issue around setting maximum and reasonable fees around non-consensual towing or police-initiated towing. So what we'll end up seeing is what I alluded to earlier, where you've got that tow bill that is probably in the thousands of dollars. Let's just say it adds up to $5,000. But then when you're looking at the invoice, you start seeing these things like gate fees, transfer fees. Well, what does that mean? I know what a towing fee is. I know that vehicle is being hitched onto a tow truck. I know the daily storage fee and what that means. But what are all these miscellaneous fees that are coming out of here? What happens when an unscrupulous tower charges for hazmat fees? And this is an issue that we end up seeing a lot. Towing services will charge for a cleanup fee to clean up an accident scene, but they'll charge for a hazardous material cleanup, even though we've seen a few gallons of gasoline spill onto the roadway and some glass. And they'll charge for excessive amounts, even though all they're applying is an absorbent. And by the way, one of the most cost-effective absorbents out there to clean up spills is kitty litter, believe it or not. And the hazmat cleanup essentially is applying kitty litter and using a broom to sweep it up. That's just one side of the coin. Then there's also the unwarranted use of specialized equipment, where we start seeing an accident scene that results in several dump trucks being brought in order to clean out the debris, whether it's hazardous or non-hazardous materials, specialized vehicles in order to haul away certain materials. Well, is that warranted? And there's no real explanation that we're seeing on some of these invoices that details and explains and justifies why specific equipment was used and why a specific amount was actually charged.
And that really kind of brings up an issue that your organization talked about in a recent statement, which is the whole thing of transparency, or the lack thereof. Is that really the main problem with transparency? Are there other problems there?
Yes. I mean, if I'm an accident victim, just to give you an example, I get into a car wreck. Luckily, I'm still on the scene. I don't have to go to the hospital. But if that tower gets called to the accident scene by the police in order to haul away my vehicle, and I ask for a rate sheet that explains what their charges are, I should be able to see what exactly they're going to charge me for every service that they offer. I should be able to understand what a gate fee actually means. To this day, what does a gate or transfer fee actually mean? So establishing some transparency around that, requiring towers in order to explain why a fee is what is charged at that amount and what this fee actually means, will help clear the air around the fees that are being charged, and will help when it's time. When we start seeing some of these more inflated and fraudulent towing bills coming through, it'll help our investigators understand what kind of services were actually done in the process of towing away that vehicle.
I want to talk a little bit about the indirect effects of this. Obviously, if you're the subject of one of these predatory tows, there's a very direct effect, but this also affects insurance policyholders more broadly. Can you talk about how this kind of thing affects insurance rates that all policyholders may be paying?
At the end of the day, predatory towing has the same impact that we see in other areas of insurance fraud. From your unscrupulous roofer who's ripping up shingles in order to file a bogus insurance claim, to a bad auto glass shop that's replacing a windshield, even though there was maybe a little divot to that windshield that didn't necessarily need to be replaced, but charging hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, in order to do so. At the end of the day, it's going to be the consumer who's going to suffer, because as these practices continue unabated, as we start seeing these claims being filed and paid out, insurers will have no choice but to factor in the costs associated with this fraudulent activity, with these inflated towing bills, into premiums. And ultimately, it's the consumers who are going to pay this premium. So it's going to come out of their pocket one way or another, as the market needs to adjust to account for this fraudulent activity.
Obviously, we've talked a lot about the problem. I wonder if we can talk for a moment about solutions. What does your organization think is needed to address this situation, specifically in Florida, but also elsewhere?
I think it's time to reform towing laws, not just in Florida, but all across the country, to make sure that they're up to par to account for some of the gray areas or loopholes that tend to be exploited by these unscrupulous towers. Now, I don't want to necessarily portray the towing industry as just made up of these bad actors that are looking to scam people. Most often than not, we have 5% of, 5% represents those bad towers, the bad apples in the bunch, who end up causing 95% of the problem. But it's those 5% who know how to navigate and exploit existing law in order to conduct this fraud. So that's where establishing guardrails, consumer protections, and transparency around towing fees, around towing services, that will help combat a lot of this predatory activity that we're seeing carried out by these unscrupulous towers and ultimately plaguing consumers. Also creating some uniformity around towing and storage fees. I understand that local jurisdictions, cities and counties, will have the right in order to set those rules. But if they're going to vary on a jurisdictional basis, that's going to create a lot of confusion. It's going to create a lot of gray areas that can be exploited. So to have these towing and storage fees, these maximum fees, clarified and established at the state level, where everybody's working off the same rate sheet, will go a long way to creating some structure, to creating some clarity, to creating some transparency that'll help combat a lot of those invoices that we see that are in the thousands, tens of thousands, heck, in some cases, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's why it's important to support legislation that goes about doing this. We're seeing that happen in Florida. There's legislation that's going through the process now in order to address these issues. We're seeing that pop up in other states as well for introducing legislation. So supporting these efforts in order to clean up state statutes and close these loopholes is probably the priority that's needed to address this situation.
I've been talking with Eric DeCampos of the National Insurance Crime Bureau about the problem of predatory towing and what lawmakers are doing in Florida to tackle it. We'll continue to keep an eye on the situation in Florida and elsewhere. You can follow our coverage on our website, landline.media, in the pages of Landline Magazine, and on our program. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Tax time is quickly approaching, and truckers need to be gathering what they need in order to file by the deadline. But sometimes you don't get everything you should receive for that task. To get an idea of what can happen and what to do, I talked with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. Well, Shasta, our topic today is what to do if you don't receive tax documents or if you've got incorrect amounts reported. And I thought it'd be important to start off with some of those tax documents. One of the big ones, of course, is the 1099. For folks that are maybe just getting into being an independent contractor, what is a 1099?
A 1099 will be reporting your gross income. For anyone you've done work for, they will issue a 1099 to you. So you may have worked for multiple carriers. Maybe you were with one carrier for the whole year, so you could just receive one 1099 or multiples. So you want to make sure that you receive one from anyone you've done work for throughout the year.
Okay. What information does that contain?
That's going to contain, your business name, your identification number, and the gross amount of your earnings. That amount on that 1099, that's being filed with the IRS. So maybe you grossed, 150,000 for the year, and that's what the IRS sees as your income. Now, with a tax return, what we then do is we take all your business expenses and we deduct it from that gross amount. So that's why it's so important to have all your records and you're picking up all your deductions, because you don't want to pay tax on 150,000 when in reality maybe your taxable profit was only 40,000. So that's how crucial it is. So the IRS, once they get that 1099, they're thinking, this taxpayer made a lot of money, we're going to get a lot of taxes from him. But in reality, it's only a portion of what is reported on that 1099.
Now, how does a W-2 differ from that?
Well, with a W-2 from an employer, an employer is required to withhold taxes from your pay. So they're withholding your federal, your state, your Social Security, all of those things are already withheld from your pay. And you get a W-2 and it reports what your gross income was, how much federal withholding was sent to the IRS under your name, the state, so forth, Social Security. All those are reported. So when you file your tax return as a W-2 employee, then when you're taking your deductions and file your return, then they'll see, have you overpaid? Then you'll get that money back in a refund. If for some reason you've underpaid, then you will owe. But typically with a W-2, if you have the correct withholdings, you should be in a, break even or refund situation.
Now, a situation that has come up that we're getting some calls on that I think is important to address is people that receive a 1099 but think they should be getting a W-2. What are your options if that happens?
Well, I think that you will contact the employer or the payer who is issuing that tax document and have that conversation with them first. I mean, initially, when you first start working for someone, if they're not withholding taxes, they are paying you as an independent contractor, and you want to resolve that as soon as possible. And really what defines an independent contractor versus an employee, it's a complex list of things that determine, what type of person you are, working as, whether you're independent or employee. So you don't want to wait till the end of the year to deal with that situation. You want to get that handled. If you've been paid as an independent contractor and you feel you're an employee, but they haven't withheld any taxes, you will have to pay the taxes on that income either way.
Now, let's talk about one of the main parts of this topic, and that is if you're supposed to get a document, but you have not received that document. What are your options in that situation?
Well, you want to call the issuing, company, agency, and request that document. They are required to have that sent out to you by January 31st. So it's February, you haven't gotten it. You need to get on the phone immediately and call and request it. The sooner the better. The longer you wait, the more desperate the situation becomes. So if you haven't received it, please call, ask, because typically this is not something people typically miss, getting out their W-2s, their 1099s, their tax documents. You want to call, they may have an old address and you didn't realize, and if it was mailed or if they're emailing and your email address has changed. So you want to make sure you take the lead on that and not just sit around waiting. Call immediately right away.
And what if you do that and they still don't provide the document? Do you have options then?
You do. I would say number one, you would verbally request. And I would keep a little, some notes on that, who you spoke with, the date that you called, you made the request, what their response was, wait the appropriate amount of time. If they said they'll get it out to you 2 to 3 days, then, wait that time, call one more time. If it still doesn't come, I would then recommend that you send a written request. I would send it certified return receipt and send that. You'll have documentation that they have received the request in writing. If they don't respond for that, then really you can request a copy of your transcripts to see what has been reported under your identification number. If no transcripts have been received, meaning they may not have filed anything, at that point, you can report the income if you have good records and you feel, content that what those earnings are. If not, then you can contact the IRS. Contacting the IRS, in our opinion, is sort of the nuclear option. We typically had to do that in situations where typically if a 1099 is issued, but the dollar amount is incorrect, the dollar amount is, say, much higher than what the actual paid amount was according to your records. That's a very serious situation. You could owe thousands of dollars on money that you've never received. So that is something that with our clients, we go through that series of the verbal contact, the written certified return receipt. If we still don't get a correction, then we will then contact the IRS. And the IRS, if you don't receive a missing or corrected form from your employer or from the payer by the end of February, you absolutely should call. If you've gone through all these other, the verbal, the written, etc., you'll need to provide the IRS with the name, address, phone number, your dates of employment. You'll need to give all that to the IRS, and then they will contact the employer or payer to request the missing form. So typically, if we're having trouble, when we send that written certified letter, we will mention that if we do not receive the corrected or missing document, that the next step for that taxpayer will be to contact the IRS, and the IRS will be their next call. I mean, we want to initially go into it polite. There's plenty of times there's just a very simply explained error, like a missing email address, etc. But otherwise, if you're not having luck, the IRS will follow up and we'll get that document.
Something I feel I need to ask about, because I know someone is thinking about this right now listening to us. If you don't receive a 1099, but you should have, are you free to not report that income? Because I know someone is thinking that right now.
No, you absolutely are not. You have to, whether a 1099 was filed or not, you must report that income. And if the only way that is doable is going back through, say, all your settlements, all your income records, and filing on that amount, because let's say you don't file, say, oh, they didn't file a 1099. I didn't have any income. I don't have to pay any tax. I don't have to file a return. Well, if they can file that 1099 a year from now, 2 years from now, and then you're going to have all this tax liability because you didn't file, you're going to have all this interest and penalty, and that can go from a molehill to a mountain in absolutely no time, that interest and penalty. So you don't want to think that, oh, I dodged a bullet. I don't have any income when you know you did. You've got to report it and you've got to pay the tax on it.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about something else that you had brought up, which is what to do if a tax return is complete but doesn't seem correct. Can you give us an example of what you're talking about there?
Well, I've had calls from taxpayers who've had a tax return completed, not clients of ours, and they said they don't feel that the results are accurate. They don't know what's wrong, but it just doesn't feel right. And, absolutely go with your gut. Our number one recommendation is to review that return with your tax preparer. Let them know how you're feeling. They should, in all cases, sit down with you and review that return and go over the expenses with you, go over all the deductions with you. If you still don't feel like it's right, most tax preparers will do an analysis. We will do an analysis at no charge for someone in that situation. If they'll send us a copy of the return, we will review it and let you know what our feeling is, if what we feel is missing. If we are looking at a tax return and we see that there's no, say, per diem on there, and we'll catch that right away. And we'll let you know. If the tax return looks complete to us and that a good job was done, we're going to tell you that too. There's no point in us or any other tax preparer reviewing another preparer's return and saying, oh, this is all wrong, we can do better, and then not be able to do better with the exact same information. So it makes no sense. But I would say give a call to your own tax preparer. If you're still not feeling confident, get a second opinion before filing. Please don't file that return if you don't feel comfortable with it. Get that second opinion first and see what they say. Because it could be that there was just something that wasn't caught. Because if you're talking to someone who does only trucking, they're going to know what the typical expenses are, what the typical, kind of ratios look like from income, from gross income to what typical profit is versus that income. We're going to know what expenses we should see for anybody in the trucking industry. And if any of those expenses are missing, we're going to spot that right away. Most of the cases where we review a return, it's because they've gone to a tax preparer. Not that they're not a good preparer, they're a great preparer, but they may not be familiar with trucking. And trucking is such a very specific, detailed industry. And there are so many deductions specific to trucking that aren't with any other business, that a great tax preparer, not knowing trucking, could miss some big things. And that's not that they're not a good tax preparer. It's the knowledge of the industry that typically is a problem.
I've been talking with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service about what to do if you don't receive all the tax documents you need in order to file your taxes. If you have questions about this or other tax matters, you can contact Shasta May by calling 1-888-407-1669, by email at smay@mbataxhelp.com, or by going to the company's website, mbataxhelp.com. Again, that phone number is 1-888-407-1669. The email address is smay@mbataxhelp.com, or you can go to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. We'll have all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box, and you'll find all the email addresses, website links, and phone numbers we mention on the show, plus links to related articles. Again, that's on landlinenow.com. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Never can't miss accuracy when you're truck on a cat scale.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Recently, the U.S. Department of Labor published a proposal regarding how it plans to determine who is an employee and who is an independent contractor in the future. And that plan has generated considerable controversy. Now, some in Congress have their own plans to stop that effort in its tracks, but OOIDA is urging them to do something else first. Here to explain is Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, glad to have you here. First of all, I think we should kind of back up a little bit and talk about what the Department of Labor is doing here. And I'm forgetting right now if this is a regulation that's already in place or a proposal, but I wonder if you can explain what it is and what stage of the process it's at.
Sure. It is a final rule that the Department of Labor recently issued involving worker classification and specifically independent contractor status. And I think our members probably feel a bit of whiplash when it comes to this issue because they are constantly facing new and changing definitions and tests and whatnot. But we think this rule that recently came out is actually pretty good for independent contractors who want to remain independent contractors. It's not AB5. There's no ABC test. There's 6 factors that determine your classification. None of them kind of have veto power. I mean, if you check yes on one of the 6, that doesn't mean you're automatically an employee. It gives a lot of flexibility for truckers who are currently independent contractors to remain in that status. We know they certainly want to. I mean, that's been coming loud and clear from our membership as we talk about all these worker classification issues over the years. A lot of independent contractors in our industry want to remain that way, and we think this new rule will allow them to do so. The problem, I guess you could say, is that there will certainly be efforts to peel back this rule, essentially repeal it through what we call here on Capitol Hill a CRA. It's just basically a vote in the House and the Senate to repeal whatever rulemaking a department or agency has come to. And I think we are certainly expecting that to be the case with this independent contractor rule. But there's some twists and turns involved. It's a complex issue, but I'm happy to kind of chart the path for our members so they have clarity about it. Because like I said, I think they generally feel whiplash, and this is another twist and turn in the saga of worker classification. But we think we see light at the end of the tunnel, I guess you could say.
Well, let's talk a little bit about why it is some in Congress want to reverse this thing. What are the concerns they have about it? Because it sounds like, and as I recall, it was actually intended to bring us back to what the rule was before the Trump administration, one that had been in place for many years. What are their concerns here?
You're right. And I think a lot of their concerns come down to election time politics. I mean, we're in a good position as an organization because either rule will allow our members to remain independent contractors. We can get into discussion about on the merits which one is better. We happen to think the one that's out now is pretty sound, and there's some pitfalls associated with the rule that came out in 2021 that we're not so keen on, which we'll certainly get into. But I think a lot of folks don't trust the Biden administration to create a rule that supports independent contractors. And frankly, we were with them prior to the issuing of this rule. I mean, we fought tooth and nail against AB5 in California. And when California's Labor Commissioner Julie Su was nominated to lead the Department of Labor here in Washington, we said, absolutely not. She's going to try to federalize or nationalize AB5. But now we have to be honest and say the department took a lot of our concerns that OOIDA submitted in public comments and addressed them in this final rule. So our concerns about AB 5 being nationalized did not come to fruition. So we're looking at this rule and thinking, it's not that bad, but I still think there are folks on Capitol Hill who have a very low trust of the Biden administration. Julie Su, the Department of Labor, they don't necessarily believe this rule will do as it's promoted, and that is protect independent contractors. But like I said, I mean, you got to give the department credit when they do something right, and they've done something right with this, and that's addressing a number of concerns that we mapped out for them. They are in this final rule. I think that's why you see OOIDA saying, we're comfortable with the 2021 rule absent this one provision, but we're also very comfortable with the 2024 rule.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a letter that OOIDA put out. This was sent to some members of Congress here regarding this final rule and what Congress is doing about it. And the association has asked Congress to do something else before they try and address this rule. What is that thing?
Well, we're telling Republicans in the House who probably want to peel back this rule with a vote in the House here in the next couple weeks or months that they need to put the horse before the cart. And I'm saying this because if you go back to the 2021 rule, there is a provision in there that's baked into the rule that allows large motor carriers to basically force independent contractors who lease with them to use or adopt any sort of safety technology that motor carriers deems appropriate. So we look at that and say, well, that's a speed limiter requirement right there. We're not certainly going to support a rule that would end up with all of our members who are independent contractors potentially facing the required use of speed limiters. That's a no-go for OOIDA. So we're telling folks in the House, if you're going to peel back this 2024 new rule, you need to first pass a bill that stops FMCSA from moving forward with a speed limiter mandate, because we don't want to empower large carriers to be able to come to their independent contractors and say, well, the federal government's with us. You got to start using speed limiters. And that's the reality of what we think will happen if this current rule, the one that recently was issued by the Department of Labor, is peeled back and we revert to that 2021 rule. So we're saying, before you take any steps in repealing what the Department of Labor recently issued, you got to pass the DRIVE Act, H.R. 3039, which, like I said, would prevent FMCSA from moving forward with a speed limiter mandate.
Okay. Now, this letter that OOIDA sent out went to certain members of Congress. Who in Congress did it go to, and why in particular those members?
Well, it's addressed to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, because obviously he calls the shots on what moves the Republican majority is making in the House and what bills reach the floor. So he's the proper recipient of this letter. But we also sent it to Republicans in the House as well, simply because we expect them to be the most aggressive in trying to peel back this 2024 rule. We'll certainly share it with Democrats in the House and the Senate as well, but they are unlikely to want to unravel what we think is a very carefully and thoughtfully crafted rule, if I'm being honest. So we're trying to make sure that Republicans specifically are aware of this need to repeal the speed limiter mandate. I mean, they have the majority in the House. If you look at who's been supportive on the speed limiter issue, it's exclusively Republicans. So we think there is an appropriate process here, and that first step has to be preventing FMCSA from moving forward with the speed limiter mandate. Then they can consider repealing the current rule. And like I said, I mean, we're kind of playing with House money to an extent here, because the merits of both rules benefit independent contractors. However, that 2021 rule still has that lingering provision about speed limiters and safety technology.
Okay. Well, Colin, we're out of time, but thank you very much for the information. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I've been talking with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, obviously, this is an important issue, and the DRIVE Act is a big part of it. The DRIVE Act, again, is H.R. 3039, H.R. 3039. Call your members of Congress, especially in the House, and let them know what you think of that bill and how you support the effort to stop a speed limiter requirement. The phone number to call is the U.S. Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3683. 202-224-3121. Again, that phone number, 202-224-3121. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.